Hello, my Digi peeps. Okay, so today is part three of the videos on beginning to learn Illustrator. And today we're going to go over the next project, which is the poetry broadside. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the parameters of the assignment. And then we're also going to talk about how to do something called tracing an image in Illustrator. And we're going to look at the type tool. So I'm going to share my screen, and here you see the example that I made of a poetry broadside. A poetry broadside is, as you may have read in my description on Moodle, usually a single page with a single poem that is often accompanied by artwork. Obviously, I want you to include some artwork in your poetry broadside. And if you have chosen a poem that is really long, you may want to consider just including an excerpt. I know there are some poems that are pages and pages long, and even an entire book. So obviously, if you've chosen something that is really long, you may want to make an executive decision to include only part of the poem. So first I'm going to switch over here to the internet and bring up the image search that I did for poetry broadsides, just to give you a sense of what kinds of things are going on out there. And of course, I encourage you to do your own Google search here and see what kinds of things you come up with. And you may even want to do a search for the poem that you've chosen to work with and see what else exists out there. If you're working with something that's really well known, you are likely to find an example of a broadside that's already been created. And that's cool. You know, you can use that as inspiration. And, you know, don't worry if someone else has made a broadside of that poem, that doesn't mean that you can't, you know. Obviously, don't make one that looks just like the one that you've seen, but it might give you a good starting point on how to think about it. Now, excuse me, as we look through these, you can see that some of them are a little bit more simple. Some of them are a little bit more complicated. But all of them have in common the included poem and some kind of illustrative work that accompanies the poem. I've also pulled up this site that has a selection of examples. You know, here we have an Emily Dickinson poem. And again, you know, the illustration here is actually very, very simple. And you could choose to include something or work in a very economic way, design-wise. This one doesn't have any artwork included. You can also think about how you're going to incorporate your illustrative work with your poem. So here, this is an abstracted image. You don't have to work with literal imagery from the poem. I like how in this example, the type has been inversed here so that it is light colored on top of this orangey red. Here's another example of a more abstracted illustration. I think this one is really lovely, Death of a Naturalist. Here's another option. You could create what is a border out of your artwork that is surrounding your poem. And this last one is a nice example because all of the ones above are in a portrait orientation, and this one is in a landscape orientation. That's totally up to you. You can choose to work in either way, and you may find that you start working in one orientation and you decide that that's not working and you need to change it, and you can totally do that. I want to go back over here and show you this Pinterest site, which I don't really use Pinterest, so I apologize if I'm awkwardly navigating through it. But I thought there were some neat examples in here as well, especially that one that I clicked on, which I will try to find here. There it is. So in sort of opposition to all of those very simple illustrations, here we've got something much more complex where this squid or octopus is becoming the border, and it's not a it's not an even perfect border all the way around. It's very organic and lovely. And you'll also notice that it's very hand-drawn looking, and we can do stuff like that in Illustrator. I will note that most of these examples that we've looked at are in fact not created in Illustrator, but are done through a printmaking technique called letterpress printing. And if you are an art major or are thinking about becoming an art major, this is something that you might get to explore later in your college career. Letterpress is really fun, well, I think, but it's also really, really tedious. So, I don't know. If you have questions about it, you can ask me about it because it's something I know a little bit about. But today we're going to be working on it digitally. Okay, so coming back over to Illustrator, to complete this project, I want you to create a new blank document that is tabloid sized. So we're gonna make a new document and title it Poetry Broadside. And you may want to also include the title of the poem. So this is The Red Wheelbarrow. And this is actually going to be my third version of the Red Wheelbarrow. And here is where you can change what size you're working with. So here I want you to have tabloid selected, and it shows you 17 by 11 inches, and you can choose your orientation here, whether you want portrait or landscape. Don't worry about the bleed stuff, and don't worry about the advanced options, and go ahead and say okay. You can start your design at any point. Sometimes the easiest place to start is by actually putting your type in, because you know what that content is, which means of course you need to have your poem somewhere on your computer, in a Word document, on the internet, something, so that you can copy and paste it here. I suppose that if it's a poem that you have written and you have it written in your journal, you could just have your journal next to you and you could type it. So since that is a place to start, I will go ahead and come back out here to the internet and come over to my poem. And I'm going to go ahead and just select that type, that text, and come back over to Illustrator. Now the type tool is in your type or in your tool palette, and something to keep in mind is that you can affect or change the color of the type. So right now the color of my type is white, so that would be silly, it wouldn't show up. So I'm going to go ahead and change that right away to black before I even start. And I don't want there to be a stroke around my type because that's going to make it look bulky and awkward. So I'm going to get rid of the stroke. And then I bring my type tool into my artboard and I can click and I can paste. Obviously that is way too small. So again, with the type tool selected, you have all of your options up here. And I'm going to change that character to some different kind of font. I can get really, I don't know, lost in choosing fonts and have been known to go through this entire menu and try every single one of these until I feel satisfied. I'm also going to go ahead and choose something a little bit larger so I can see my font. And something to notice when you're thinking about type design or typography is if I zoom in here, and you may already know this, but you'll see here in this font, all of my letters have these little feet, and those are called serifs. So this is what's called a serifed font. If I were to change this to something like Helvetica, you'll see there are no feet on the text. So this is a sans serif without serif. And if you, I don't know, I think it's good for everybody to know, regardless of whether you're going into some kind of art or design career, that when you are working with type, if you're working with something that's only going to be on the web, a sans serif font is easier to read. And if you're working with something for print, a serifed font is easier to read. It doesn't really matter which you choose for this. I think more important is the visual effectiveness of your font with the overall feeling of your poem. But something kind of interesting to think about, like if, once you graduate, you say you have a website. Well, for your website, you probably want to choose a sans serif font. Whereas if you're going to be printing out a resume, you may want to choose a serifed font because it's easier for your readers to look at. That's just a side note, has nothing really to do with this project, but since I'm working with type, I felt like I wanted to bring that up. So, I'm hoping that eventually I'll get to print this out. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to that Hoffler text. And I'm going to zoom back out here. As you're working with your text, remember that you should also include the title of the poem, the author's name, and your name somewhere in the design. I neglected to do that in my example. I didn't include my own name, but make sure that you do that somehow and include the phrase maybe design by your name. That way you're getting credit, you're giving yourself credit for the design work that you've done. You can also play with the placement of the different stanzas of your font. Right now this is just very simple. It's all left justified. But if you were so inclined, you could come in here and you could, let's say, I'm going to cut this. So I'm going to Apple X and get rid of some of that extra spacing. I'm going to come over here and get my type tool again and paste. And this gives me the opportunity to separate out those lines of text so that if I wanted to, I could create a cascade of text. So if I came in here and I cut this and move this down a bit, make sure that you don't lose the order of the stanzas, obviously, because that's important. And I could do that again with this. Just kind of separating all of this stuff out so that I have more control over each of those lines of text. And that's actually really pretty lovely like this, cascading down. You are far from done at this point. You still need to start adding some design. Um, so something, and I think I discussed this in one of my previous videos in regards to Photoshop, sometimes having a white background is a little bit glaring, and B, is a little bit, it's that white canvas situation where it's like, it's hard to get started on any kind of design work when you're just kind of staring down this blank page. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna draw a shape, a rectangle that completely covers the background of this document. I'm going to go to my shape tool. I'm gonna get a rectangle, and obviously I don't want it to be black. I want something a little softer. So in my example, I had kind of a soft tan color. So I'm gonna go ahead and choose that and say okay. And I'm gonna draw this rectangle to the exact dimensions of my artboard. Uh-oh, it's covered up all of my text. If this happens, that's because you've done this after you did your text, and it's an easy solution. All we need to do is reorient the arrangement of the shapes. So I'll come up here to Object and choose Arrange, and I'm going to send this tan rectangle to the back. And now it got pushed back behind the text, and so now I can see that text. Now I want to start adding some design elements. In my example, I included a line on the top and the bottom, and this just kind of creates a visual, well, and a literal border, and it keeps your viewer's eye inside of the frame. So once again, I could choose the rectangle tool. I could also choose the line segment tool for this task. This is one that we haven't looked at, but it operates very similarly to the shape tool. However, because it's just a single line, you don't want to have any fill color. You do want to have a stroke color. So for now, I'm going to choose, I'm just going to choose a basic red. And to be honest, I'm going to change that later, but for now, that'll work. And I'll just go ahead and draw my line segment there. And I'm going to make that a thicker line by upping the stroke. And again, you've got some other options that you can play with. Well, that's kind of nice. So I'm into that. I'm gonna leave it like that. And I'm gonna copy and paste that shape and move this down to the bottom. Ooh, I really like this. Okay. Now, as promised, we're going to talk about tracing an image. So you can do this with something photographic that you've pulled from the web or that you have created yourself. I went ahead and found some examples on the web of images that I was interested in working with. I've already placed them into my folder for my broadsides so that I knew where they were because, well, my internet is still spotty, so I didn't want to have you wait on that. So I'm going to go ahead and grab one of those photographs. For this example, I went ahead with something very literal. I looked for a photograph of a red wheelbarrow. So I'm going to go to File, and this is something new. I'm going to choose the option of Place. So I'm going to place a photograph into this document. And like I said, I've got all my things in my broadsides folder. And something to note here, you can see that this was a screenshot. And that's because I wasn't able to capture the actual JPEG off of the website that I was looking at. It was like a, I don't know, like it was a product. You could buy this to decorate your house with at, I don't know, Crate and Barrel or something. So I just took a screenshot of it. And again, because I'm incorporating it into this greater design, I'm not worried about it being plagiarism because I am significantly changing its purpose and its existence. But also, the screenshot works fine in Illustrator because I'm going to turn it into a vector. If I were to do this in Photoshop, a screenshot just really wouldn't cut it because the resolution is too low. But in Illustrator, we don't have to worry about resolution. So I'm gonna go ahead and place that. And the image really is not this tiny. It's just giving me a thumbnail right now. And so I'm actually gonna place it out here in the gray space so I can see how big it is. Oh, that's not too bad. Okay, if when you paste, it's like really gigantic, go ahead and scale it down by bringing your mouse over the corner and make sure you hold that shift key down so that you don't squish or distort the image. So now it's time to have some fun with this photograph. I'm just gonna scooch over here so that you can see that. And I'm actually gonna zoom in a little bit so that you can see that even better. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to work with Illustrator to tell the program to go in and identify all the different colors of this photograph and convert them into individual shapes because, like I keep saying, Illustrator works on the idea of building form out of shape. To do that, I'm going to open up my image trace window. Go to Window, Image Trace. And this new dialog box or palette will open up and you've got a lot of cool options to play with. And again, don't be afraid to play with them. For my purposes, for this photograph, I'm going to change the preset to a, well, you know what? I'm going to leave it on default and see what happens. But again, like look at what you're working with and see what makes sense. My instinct tells me to try high fidelity photo, but I'm gonna go with default for now. Now, I don't want it to be in black and white. I want to preserve the color. So I'm going to choose color. And here I can choose the number of colors that I want. The more colors, the more photographic it's going to look. The fewer colors, the more illustrated it's going to look. So I want fewer colors. I want to bring this down to 5. Then I'm not going to worry about these advanced settings except for this box here that says ignore white. I want the white to just become transparent. So I'm going to click on that and I'm going to go ahead and say trace. And this will take just a second to process. So now you can see it has converted that photograph into these blocks of color that are still really effective. Even though there's only 5 colors, it's still really effective in communicating to us that this is a wheelbarrow, right? You have one more step to do before it has actually been completely vectorized, and that is up here in your top menu, you have to press the word expand. I do that, and now it's defining each one of those shapes, each one of those blocks of color as its own shape. It is, however, still grouped together. So if I use the selection tool, and I'm going to go ahead and close my image trace window. If I use the selection tool and I grab onto that, it's going to move all those shapes together for me. So I'm really starting to see a composition coming together here. At this point, I might want to reduce the size of my text. Oops. Oh, I forgot that I had separated all those out. So I may want to reduce that. And I may want to work with, you know, bringing these a little bit closer, et cetera, et cetera. Now, remember how I said I wanted to change the color of these eventually? Well, the time has come. I'm going to go ahead and select both of them by clicking on this one and then shift clicking on the top one. So now they're both selected and they will both be, the colors will both change at the same time. So with those shapes chosen, selected, I'm going to come over to my tool menu and I'm going to choose the eyedropper tool. And I'm going to get this red from the wheelbarrow. Why did they disappear? Oh, they're just very, very tiny now. Well, I'm not sure what happened there. So maybe I just need to come back in and do this over again. Oh, I see. It's because I changed the fill color accidentally instead of the stroke color. Okay, well, what I need to do then is this little swappy arrow. I need to do that in order to change that stroke color to match the wheelbarrow color. And this is just a design choice that is creating a sense of unity, right? So this makes everything work together a little bit better. The other photograph, or the other image that I wanted to include, was a white chicken. So I'm going to do that same tracing situation. So I'm going to go to File and Place. And I'm going to get my chicken. And I'm going to place my chicken. The chicken is quite large, but that's cool. And two things to consider here. The chicken is on this actually very lovely blue background. And so I'm eventually going to want to delete that. You could do this in Photoshop first. Like you could select your chicken and just copy and paste your chicken onto a white background. And then you could place that image. That's why it's really helpful to know both Photoshop and Illustrator, because you can go back and forth and it makes things really convenient. But you can also do it in Illustrator. It's just a little bit different. So I'm going to go back through those same steps to trace this image. And yeah, I'm going to keep it to 5 colors again. And this time I'm not going to ignore the white because my chicken is white. So I'm going to leave that unchecked. We'll give that a second to process. It's so pretty. Sorry. And then I'm going to remember to expand that. So now the task of getting rid of the blue. Well, what I'm going to do is, with the selection tool chosen, I'm going to come in and, well, actually, I'm sorry. Now you want to go over to the direct selection tool. And if I click, it's going to highlight each of those colors. So I can highlight that and I can just press delete. This becomes a little bit of an arduous task because you can see it's leaving little bits behind, and I'll want to zoom in and really delete every little bit of that. So, you know, I guess it just depends on your working preferences. Like, honestly, my working preferences would actually be to have cleaned this all up in Photoshop first. But I wanted to show you how you can do it in Illustrator. And it's really not that, it's not that arduous. But I would go through and actually I can probably just highlight these like this, delete those, delete that, continue to delete until I've got a nice cleaned up image. And when I then go to move my chicken onto my artboard, I don't want to use the direct selection tool because it would just move one patch of color, one shape essentially. So I want to go back to the selection tool and go ahead and move my chicken into the space. Hey now, that's not cool. Let's try this again. There we go. And once again, you see my chicken is now on top of everything, so I need to send it back. I'm not going to send it all the way back because then it would be behind this tan rectangle. So I'm just going to there we go, send backward, send backward, send backward. Just going to keep doing that until all of the type is showing. There we go. And again, I may want to do some more cleanup. Don't worry about excess stuff hanging off of your artboard because again, that stuff isn't going to print. And when you save this as a PDF, that stuff isn't going to show up. I decided when I was working on my example that the chicken's feet were a little bit distracting down there. So I just highlighted that using the direct selection tool. And honestly, I just deleted it. And I didn't feel like that altered the image in any way that was significant to understanding what was happening here. So that is how I built up that image. I want to show you one other thing because I know some of you may be inclined to do some drawing. So I'm going to come out here to this white document that I already had open and just show you that image trace using a sketch. So I made a funny sketch yesterday of a diagram. I really like diagrams of spaces. So I made a diagram of part of my house, and I just like quickly sketched it out. And then I photographed it with my phone. And so you can see this is the photograph. I photographed it on a table. And I took it into Photoshop and I cropped out all of the table. So here's that file. So I'm going to place it. And you can see this is like really sketchy. But it's also something stylistically that I'm inclined to enjoy. Oops, I'm in the direct selection. Go back to my regular selection and scale that down just a tad so that it fits onto my artboard. So this kind of falls into that category where, I mean, like, yes, this is a literal diagram. It's also not particularly easy to read and it is very, very sketchy. So, I mean, I would consider this to be a fairly abstract drawing or abstracted. And, maybe my poem has something to do with the idea of home. And this is how I've decided that I want to illustrate that idea of home. There's an artist I like, just side note, whose name is Guillermo Cuitca. Feel free to look him up, who works with these kinds of diagrams of the house that he grew up in. And they're really lovely drawings and paintings. So again, I'm going to go to Window and Image Trace. And now, instead of doing the default, I'm going to choose Sketched Art. And you can see it kind of got rid of a lot of my details. So what I want to do is change the threshold here. So if I bring that up, it's going to recognize more of my mark making. And yeah, I do want to ignore the white because if I wanted to create a different colored background, I wouldn't want this to be in a white rectangle. And it automatically, when you choose the I don't know, something that I chose up here, it turns the preview on. And when the preview is on, you don't actually have to press the trace button. And in fact, you can't press the trace button. So it's actually doing it in a more, you're like live editing it. But you do still need to expand it. So expand. And so here now I have my rough diagram. And again, if I wanted to draw or change the background color to something that I felt was representative of my living space, which I would not say hot pink is that, but I'm going to go with it. If I draw that, oh, why are you gray? Well, I've obviously messed up some setting, but it should be bright pink. So I'm going to send that object back. But maybe gray is what meant to happen here. I'm not going to go through and solve this issue right now. And because I think it's just I must have some setting clicked that I forgot about. But if you run into this problem, let me know and I can walk you through it. So you can see that you can really get a variety of visual results. At the end, when you have completed your work, I want you to save it both as an Illustrator file and as a PDF. And it's really important as you're working on this to save it as an Illustrator file so that you can come back in and keep working on it, right? So to do that, of course, you're going to go to File and Save As. Make sure you know where it's going. So I'm going to drop this into my broadsides. And this is not yet a final file, so I'm not going to put it in my final files, but once it is completed, I will move it to that final files. Make sure that here it says Adobe Illustrator and save. Go ahead and just leave all the default settings, that's fine. And now I'm going to save as once again. So again, pretend like this is once your file is completed and you're ready to turn it in. You're going to save it as a PDF. So here, you're going to change that to PDF. You're going to press save. Make sure you know where it's going. And here, the only thing I want you to change is I want you to uncheck this preserve Illustrator editing capabilities because I don't want to be able to open your file and accidentally edit it. So I want you to lock it in by unchecking that. And this PDF is what you're going to upload into Moodle. Yeah, this is fine. If you get this notification, say okay. And thus concludes the demo on how to make a poetry broadside. I hope that you have fun with it. If you get working on it and you get stuck, reach out, shoot me an email. I'm happy to Zoom with you and share screens and whatever. And also, don't feel like you absolutely have to commit to the poem that you picked out last week. If you, after seeing this, you're like, oh man, I have a million other ideas, go with it, see what happens. And of course, you can always make multiples and then choose the best one to turn in. So, all right, have fun with it. And you will see me again next week. All right, bye.